Hi everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about a concept called the rhetorical triangle. We get this from Aristotle and the Greek philosophers. You've already heard me use the word rhetoric. You may remember me using it when I told you that my degree was in composition and rhetoric. So what does this word mean? Oh, and by the way, when you're watching these videos, it's a good idea to have a piece of paper and pen nearby. You'll need to take notes since the concepts will appear on quizzes and tests. So if you want, go grab a sheet of paper and a pen if you don't have one handy already. So what is the word rhetoric? Well, rhetoric refers to the art of persuasion. It's as simple as that. We hear the term a lot and it's confusing, but basically whenever you are trying to persuade someone of something, whether it's to buy you something or to go with you somewhere or in a courtroom, when lawyers are arguing their case, they're using rhetoric. They're making various types of appeals in order to persuade people of things. So before I deliver a message about a concept called the rhetorical triangle, I'd like you guys to take a minute to think about a time when you communicated something to somebody and that communication did not go as planned. This could be an email that went wrong. It could be a conversation that went wrong. And I'm going to give you a second to think about that and to write down what that experience was. And in the meantime, I'm going to draw something for you. So again, you're thinking about a time when a communication with somebody went wrong, and that could be an email, it could be a phone conversation, or an in-person conversation. Okay, got something down? So we're talking about the rhetorical triangle today. The rhetorical triangle is a concept that's often used to talk about our communications with other people when they go well and when they go badly. And you'll notice in this triangle that at the very top we have logos, and I apologize in advance for my handwriting. That's L-O-G-O-S. We have ethos in the bottom left corner, E-T-H-O-S, and we have pathos, P-A-T-O-S, in the right-hand corner of this triangle. If you've taken expository writing, you're likely familiar with these concepts. Logos is the type of reasoning that people use when they're making a logical claim. So these are hard facts. This is when you use statistics or reasoning in order to make an appeal. Ethos is an ethical appeal. So this is when a speaker tries to establish credibility with the audience. This may be because, for example, when I told you I'm an assistant professor and when I told you that I have a JD and a PhD, that's me trying to establish credibility with my audience. But an engineer does this too. They may talk about the various positions they've held as an engineer in order to be credible to people they're working with so that people trust them. Ethos is a lot about trust. Pathos, that's an emotional appeal. That's when you're trying to pull at someone's heartstrings in order to persuade them of something. So I was talking to my stepdaughter about these 3 appeals recently. She's about to turn 9, and I used the example of trying to get her father to buy her ice cream. And so we talked about the kinds of emotional appeal she might make, that maybe she hasn't been taken in a really long time, or she might use a logical appeal. She might appeal to logos and talk about the importance of certain types of proteins for the growing child body. Or she might use ethos. She might try to talk about how good a particular restaurant is and how they're using organic ingredients as a means of convincing her dad to take her there. This is a part of the rhetorical triangle. And this concept also helps us to understand when messages don't go right. You'll notice also what we have here is the message in one quarter with logos. So that message might be an email, it might be a text message, it might be a phone conversation. We have the speaker, so the person who's delivering the message, and then we have the person who's receiving it. Something can always go right or wrong with all parts of this triangle. So for example, a lot of the time, let's say you're reading a book and you start to get kind of frustrated with it. Maybe you don't like the author's writing style, or maybe you're starting to question that writer's use of facts. When those things happen, ethos or credibility might be breaking down. And often, let's say you turned in a piece of writing to a faculty member, to your professor, and you didn't get the grade you wanted, and you felt they were being really critical of your writing. Often, that's an ethos-related issue too, because what we tend to do is be really generous with writers who we're familiar with. So if I love a certain author, they can make mistakes, and I'm going to be friendlier towards that than with someone who's writing who I don't know very well. So I'll share one example of when a communication of mine went wrong. I was a graduate student at the University of Florida, where I earned my master's in film and media studies. And I was working with a professor I liked a lot. I really respected him. And I got confused at some point because some of the graduate students seemed to call him by his first name, Greg. And a lot of people called him Dr. Ulmer. And so one day, I always called him Dr. Ulmer. It's a respect issue. But one day I got a little confused and I sent him an email and I referred to him as Greg. Whoa, was he mad? He wrote me an email back telling me that I didn't have permission to call him that until after I had graduated. It was a really scary email to receive, but I wasn't upset about it. It was a respect issue. I had just gotten a little bit confused, and we kind of joked with each other, and I ended up finding my own little nickname for him, Dr. Glue. Glue is one of his other nicknames, which I end up still calling him to this day. There's a rule for this, by the way, that we're going to talk about when we get to the professional correspondence unit, which is you always go more formal until you are invited to be less formal. So when you write emails to me or to other professors, you always say doctor, or you do some research online to find out what their position is. If they're a dean, you say, Dear Dean so-and-so. And you wait till they sign an email with something other than that name. If you write Dear Dean Hathaway, and then at the end of the email, that dean signs off with the name Anne, you know you're good to go to call them Anne. But otherwise, it's always, always, always more formal rather than less. No one will ever get mad at you for being more formal, but you could have the experience that I had. Some thinkers update this rhetorical triangle. And I apologize for my drawing skills here, but you'll see that what they do is they draw a circle and they put this message in a context. And I want to give you just a few seconds to think about why this is important. What impact does context have on a communication? Well, what you might be thinking about is that you send text messages all the time, right? But when you send a text message to a professor, the context has now changed. It is now no longer a peer conversation, and so different rules apply. You have to use more formality in your texting than you ordinarily might. Some other contexts change the nature of a message that you send. For example, writing traditions are different in Asia than they are in the US. We're going to watch a video about this called Writing Across Borders. But when you're in the US, you're expected to be really upfront with people in communication and really direct. So you tell them the message right away. If you're from another country, if you're from South America, another part of the world, like South America, for example, this is experienced as rude. You're expected first to engage with a person and greet them and say hello. Your message comes later. That's just one minor way of how context comes into play. Now, this is a little lesson on the rhetorical triangle. Now your job is in the discussion section to add your own experiences to this. Talk about the experiences you wrote down, the message when you had a message that went wrong, and tell us what was involved with that communication going wrong. Was it the context? Was it about one of the appeals you were making? Was it about ethos, pathos, and logos? Was it about the audience member not understanding? And you can also include any other details that you think are interesting related to the lesson that I just delivered.